Did you know it's been speculated that Frank Sinatra, Florence Nightingale, and Ludwig van Beethoven all had bipolar disorder? Find out more about this mental illness and how people who have it live full, productive, meaningful lives just like those three did. That's next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. It's known for euphoric highs and dramatic lows, but bipolar disorder is more than just a bad case of being moody, and it can present challenges both for those with bipolar disorder and those who love them. Our guests tonight have helpful insights and great advice for individuals and families coping with this illness. So call in your questions right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. And you can also email us your questions by using the address listed at the bottom of your screen. And you should be well rested and ready to roll with those questions after our 2-week break. And now's your chance. Get going. Let's meet our guest. Dr. John Glick is a board-certified psychiatrist who's been working in community mental health since 1991 at the Human Development Center, where he works primarily with adults. Jim Gruba is a licensed psychologist and the supervisor of the crisis response team at the Human Development Center. And Heather Bates is a woman who's living with bipolar disorder, who's graciously agreed to share the story of her journey with us tonight. Thanks to all of you for coming out on this cold and now snowy night to add to more of the big time snow that we've already accumulated, because it looks like we need even more snow. And to get started, I think, you were talking a little earlier this evening about some research that you read recently. I think we think a lot, we hear the term bipolar a lot, even in general conversations with people who don't necessarily work in the field of mental health. But what do we know about how much people really know about bipolar disorder?
I think I mentioned that phone survey from Germany where they called 1,000 people and asked them if they know what bipolar disorder is, and 4% of the population in Germany understood what bipolar disorder is. So in mental health, we think we use the term every day, but it's maybe not as well understood in the public as we think it is.
And so we hear, Jim, people using that term, but maybe not quite understanding what that means.
Yes, and people might be more familiar with the term manic depressive, which is the old term for bipolar, or a form of bipolar. And I guess that's useful in thinking about the people with bipolar often swing from one end of the spectrum to the other in terms of depression at its worst and mania at its best or worst, depending on how you view it. And so there is some validity to that old term. But yes, bipolar is something that people use, they throw on the term, but do people really know what it is? I think this is an opportunity to talk about that, and I think our guest here is going to help us understand that from her perspective as well.
I think so. And Heather, even before you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, do you feel like you understood what that meant?
I kind of had a grasp of, I thought it was mood swings, from highs to lows. Mm-hmm. Pretty familiar because of my own experience. So I guess up until this last manic episode did I become really familiar about what it really meant in my in this manic episode. It was awful, my last one. So I finally got a grasp of it. I've always believed in mental illness, but I finally started to understand how devastating it really can be.
And Dr. Glick, we see this sometimes, what Heather's describing as sort of this evolving awareness of one's own mental illness for people who have mental illness, in this case bipolar disorder. Let's talk a little bit about the symptoms of bipolar disorder, and let's talk about maybe the depression end of that.
Yeah, well, it's got moods on both ends of the extreme. During the depressive moods, energy is low, and often people feel like they want to eat and sleep more and feel very lethargic. And then on the high swings, it's more of a euphoric, excessive energy, excessive activity sort of mood.
And Heather, when did you first start experiencing mental health symptoms?
Late teens, early 20s, probably my first manic episode, but I didn't get diagnosed till like a year ago, so I didn't know what it was.
And in your late teens, what did it feel like to you?
I felt like I could get sad a lot more than my friends were, like, you know, like take things far more seriously than they would, and they would, you know, you can get sad for like a couple of days about something that's upsetting, but when you're sad for like a long time, and then also the kind of the mania combined in it, that's something else. It's like a roller coaster ride. It really is.
And you had mentioned that that it wasn't until this most recent manic episode did you have a full appreciation of the manic phase. And so in the beginning, had you had manic phases that were maybe not as quite to such a great degree as this last one?
Yeah, I was able to convert all that energy into productive things. I could move the whole house. Like I'd have the, you know, second floor up on the first and the first floor up down on the second. Just tons of stuff that I could get done. That was my outlet. I would try to find any other way to kind of calm myself down. Pot came in to bring that down so that I wouldn't have to feel all that anxiousness. And
so you experienced that manicness as kind of an anxiousness and an agitation.
Yeah, yeah.
And we know that other people, Jim, experience a little bit more euphoria with that.
Yeah, it's interesting talking to people. One, people sometimes think they have bipolar if they have sort of mood swings that last for a few moments or a day, and with people with bipolar, it's usually much longer than that. And the euphoria, I don't know about in your case, but for some people that I've worked with, they've enjoyed it until they didn't. You know, when you're using that much energy and staying awake maybe for days at a time or with minimal sleep for days at a time and accomplishing a lot, eventually you run out of gas, you know, you run out of energy, and then you begin to crash. And then I think also the realization that people have when they start to come down that some of the things they were doing and thinking maybe weren't so healthy or good for them. Sometimes people engage in not just productive behavior, but risky behavior when they're manic, spend too much money, get involved in relationships inappropriately, things that make sense at the moment, but when they start to come down, realize that some of this was not so pleasant or productive, and then as they go into the depressive end, it's a swing the whole other direction. I guess the other piece is that sometimes people get to the point, I don't know if you experience this, but some real delusions at the high end in terms of how productive they are, or who they are, who they can be, and then at the other end, when they're depressed, how worthless they feel, and so there's sort of delusional quality, or can be, at both ends.
So let's talk a little bit about that for you, Heather, of some of the things that Jim was just describing. If that was, you know, you said that this most recent manic episode was your eye opener for you, of, oh, this isn't just me being a little bit more energetic and irritable.
Right.
I think that there's something else going on here. What were those symptoms like for you?
I started out like euphoric. I woke up one day and I had energy again. I think I read something in a book that just all of a sudden inspired me. For some reason, things just switched that quickly, and I went into a manic episode.
Like a light switch.
Yeah, it was bizarre, and I was so excited about this newfound information that I found, and I was about to save the world, and I think it just exacerbates, like, when you, I'm way into like social injustice. I feel for people very empathetically, and when you are manic, it's just way up there. I mean, you actually think that you can you know, do huge things and accomplish great things. Not that you can't, but it usually takes some time to get there. And so it starts like that, and then you have your whole family looking at you like, what are you doing? What, you can't even control your own house, and you know, you're going to go out and save the world or whatever. So then I get angry at them.
Because they didn't understand
Yes.
how, in fact, you could save the world.
Right, and then I would just get really angry with them, and so then therefore I left. And so I can understand. And then, like you said, when you're coming down, it's awful. You look back and you're like, oh my God.
So let's talk about that a little, Dr. Glick. A couple of things I want to talk about here is, number one, how typical is it for people to recall and have insight about those more severe phases of the disorder?
It can be kind of hard to remember those, the high manic episodes. I think partly people sometimes want to forget what happened. Partly it might be a state-dependent memory that when you're not in that state, it's just hard to remember. But a lot of people don't recall. So, and that's one of the reasons bipolar disorder often isn't diagnosed right away. It can really help with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder to interview a family member or somebody that knows that person well and can also give you that history.
And what's the age that we usually first start seeing bipolar disorder?
Well, you mentioned the late teens, and that's a pretty common age of onset for bipolar and for many serious mental illnesses for that matter. So in late teens into the 20s is the common time period of onset.
And related to that, we just got a question in. This is sort of the other end of this. A woman, Jim from Duluth, calls in and said she's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder in her teens. Does bipolar disorder go away now she's in her late 40s?
Well, I think the general belief is that it doesn't go away per se, but that with time and treatment and awareness, that certainly the symptoms can be reduced. And conversely, for some people, that's the opposite is true if they don't get good treatment and good awareness. So I'm not sure what she meant by going away, but I don't think it goes away per se, but is more controlled with time, with good treatment.
We don't cure it like we can cure pneumonia.
No.
But we can manage it like we manage diabetes.
Yes, and for some people it's well controlled with particular meds. I don't know if better than some other illnesses, but some of the changes can be pretty dramatic with medication for some people.
Yeah, if you have one manic episode, your chance of having another one is 90%. So, you know, it's a highly recurrent mood disorder. I think as people age, it's often more of the depression that becomes the problem than the highs. But certainly many people, you know, become very stable with their moods, and it just isn't an issue. It really depends on the treatment and the person's understanding of their illness as well. That's just very critical, to educate yourself as much as you can about what you can do to like avoid triggers to mood swings. We know staying up all night can trigger a high manic state. So that's a trigger you want to try to avoid, and we want people to be aware of the early warning signs of their mood starting to change, and we counsel people to manage stress because we know stress can trigger mood swings. So.
Now you said that, and I keep referring back to this, that this last manic episode was just a real eye-opener for you. And how did that actually, did that actually in some ways help you come to understand your illness in a funny way a little bit better?
Yeah, I really wish I didn't have to learn everything the hard way. You know, I was one extreme or the
you
other
and all the
with
rest
me.
of us, Heather.
When I go nuts, I go nuts. I just, you know, it's, yeah. I related to what the doctor was saying about there were gaps this summer that I don't even recall. People were telling me, I had witnesses that were telling me of stuff that I would do and that I had no idea about. But I was thrilled eventually with my diagnosis. If I had not been so manic at the time and kept fighting it, I think, you know, it would seem like I wasn't thrilled about it. But I'm glad I know. I'm glad, so that therefore I can treat it the right way. For many years I was treated with antidepressants, and my manic episodes, you know, that would just exacerbate things. I'd be like tons of energy, but
And I love the way you just said that I'm thrilled with my diagnosis, because that's not something that we always hear. But what you're really describing is that, number one, if you're diagnosed correctly, you can get the correct help, right? You get help that actually matters in your life. And it helps, another thing that people often express is that notion of it's a relief to know what's truly wrong, because I have felt like something
Exactly.
has been
I've been investigating it for the past 20 years, trying to figure it out, kind of going from this and that, thinking borderline, diagnosing myself, having people tell me that I was just depressed. And so now if you got an answer, then you can go from there and manage your symptoms and know, like, when you're starting to feel a little agitated, that you need to do this or that. And I think that's true of anybody. You know, that can get away from you as well. I bet with right medication and the right therapy, absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about a quick turnover, I had just gotten out of it this summer, and by January I was a full-time student and on a roll.
Good for you.
Yeah, I've been working hard.
Yeah. You shouldn't just slide that in. You need to state that with pride.
I don't know if they call that in college. I don't know if they say that, but you know,
they do.
The dean's list. I made the dean's list.
Yeah, you made the dean's list. Yeah, say that with pride. Don't just slip that under the rug there. Let's talk a little bit about medications, Dr. Glick. Both kind of the importance of medication in treating bipolar disorder and kind of the types of medications that we often.
Well, usually we start with a mood stabilizer, whether it's a low episode of depression or a high manic episode. We start with a mood stabilizer, which is a medication that can treat either a depression or a high, but won't worsen a high. Heather referred to antidepressants making her more manic, and that's the problem with antidepressants. So if you have bipolar, you don't want to be on an antidepressant unless you're first on a mood stabilizer. And lithium's the classic mood stabilizer. Lithium treats both the highs and the lows. Depakote's available, but that more works just on the highs. And so some medications will work on both sides, and some medicines more on one side than the other.
And there was a caller here, Jim, because I know you see a lot of people, and certainly through the crisis response team, where they've been diagnosed, perhaps they've been on medication, but now the problem is they're not on medication. And one of the callers says, how do you get people to continue taking their medications?
Well, it's probably not that different from physical health problems in the sense that people tend to take medications, and when they feel better, want to quit taking medications because they all have, or many have, some side effects, and so that might be a reason, or cost might be a reason. So convincing people to stay on their medications can be a challenge, and some of that is that awareness, that thing that Heather was talking about. If people they haven't gone through the process, maybe this is the first time, so they aren't aware of how this cycle works, and they haven't had a lot of education, and so making sure they have that education, understanding why they went off, because maybe that particular med is having some side effects and something else would work better. So that investigation of what's gone on, what's the real issue here, and how can we address that in some way that the person is better treated, better understanding of what's going on.
And we know, Dr. Glick, that there are some people who enjoy at least the beginning of that manic phase.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hard to want to stay on medication that takes away that thing that sort of feels good then.
Yeah, for sure. That's well, the highs feel good, and they feel like they're going to last forever, and people don't think ahead to the fact that what goes up usually comes down, and about 60% of highs are followed by very deep depressions. Manias don't always drop all the way down into depression. Sometimes people just come back down to normal, but a lot of times they go all the way back down. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's hard. It takes some time, and it takes a lot of education, and it takes learning to respect energy and not misuse it.
Heather, talk a little bit about what's been helpful for you in your treatment so that you could get on the dean's list.
Well, because it was so terrible, it was just a really big eye-opener for me. I don't see myself ever going off my medication because I'm loving this feeling. I always walk around and I'm like, this is what normal people must feel like. Because I'm not like laying in bed all the time, and nor am I like ramming around the house. I just feel like I have my normal ups and downs, and that I'm on the lithium, and it just helps out tremendously. So I won't ever come off of it. I don't see the point in doing that. I've heard of that where people are like, and I've done that too, but that was just on antidepressants. I wasn't a mood stabilizer. It hadn't all come together yet. So you're like, oh, I'm fixed. I'm fine.
So medications have been helpful, but you've been involved in therapy as well, right?
Totally. And when he was talking about like those extreme highs and when people come down, a big part, I have a therapist at HDC we have gone through, and it was a huge light bulb for me, was the shame thing. And she said it's all right to have healthy guilt, like, you know, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that and I shouldn't have done that. But when you start saying shame on you for doing this and shame on you, I was living there because you're so embarrassed, you rack up so much harm in this manic that when you hit the low, then you're like, I'm a piece of garbage. And once I realized that I was just living in this shame area, and then I needed to pull myself up, and it's all right to, you know, tell myself that, you know, that wasn't appropriate perhaps, but that I'm not garbage for it. That was a big dialogue. I had to switch that around in my head, and I still do it. We do it to little kids. Shame on you for, really? Do they need a scolding like that? You know, don't touch that, it might help. So it's kind of a societal thing, I think, you know, it's a big deal. So
for you, the combination of medication and therapy has been helpful then?
Tremendously, and I have a fabulous therapist.
Let's talk a little bit about the importance of family and how families can be supportive of individuals with bipolar disorder, Jim.
Well, I go back to what Dr. Glick said about family members being able to report what's really going on and understanding so they can provide that information, those cues. Hopefully they've had some conversation about when this happens, I'm going to do this or say this, and you know, we're going to be prepared for this a little bit. So I think having, I don't know about your case, Heather, but I'm guessing some family members, spouse, other family members have talked with you and have some awareness of how they might point out to you when you're going off the rails a bit. So I think that's important.
So is that part of your safety plan?
So grateful for my husband in particular and my mom for just sticking in there with me. I've lost just an enormous amount of friends, and you don't really do that with other. You don't necessarily do that with other mental illnesses. You're depressed. You know, you're not calling your friends. Maybe you lose them that way. It's not because you've offended them. You know, they don't want it. They don't want anything to do with you anymore. So I'm super grateful for the handful of people that I still have left in my life. And I do realize that there's other people, you know, not that I can't rekindle those, and I have made amends. And I also know that I'm not going to feel terrible the rest of my life if they choose not to accept that. You know, if I've done something that's just offended them that bad.
And that's the lesson that we all can learn from Heather about how to let things go. And that's really about, like, other people get to make their own decisions, right? And you've made your decision. You've done what you can. Other people get to make their own decisions.
And my thought process would never have been like that, I don't think, if it hadn't been for the medication and whatever. I mean, I've always tried to work my way out of things and try to do it myself. But, yeah, it's just a healthy way of living that you got to let some of that stuff go.
Yep. Dr. Glick, here's a woman who's had bipolar disorder, who's tried many different medications, wants to know, first of all, is that common, and is fearful of trying another new medication?
Yeah, it's not uncommon to have to try a number of medicines to find the right one. You have to keep in mind that you really haven't tried a medicine unless you've taken it at a certain level for a certain period of time. And but if you've done that and it hasn't worked, it makes sense to try something different, to kind of be methodical about it.
And it's normal, I think, for people to feel some fear about, if I've failed these 3 medications, is the next one going to be the one to help? And you had a number of medications because you were being treated for the wrong thing.
Right.
So
right.
It was medication that doesn't work, medication that doesn't work, medication that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Heather's a great example of how persistence pays off. And
I could see their frustration in that. It is upsetting. But as soon as that lithium, as soon as they had it nailed, I could tell. And I got to recover in the hospital. I got to come out of the hospital stable, where people are trying to do this at home and with therapy. I can imagine that's really challenging, because then your poor family should just move out for like a couple of, you know, you got to feel for these folks. You really do. I love my family. It's like a bad movie that you're a part of.
What are the resources available? Not just, so, and when we're talking about resources and kind of dovetailing on what Heather just said, resources not just available for the person, but for the family members as well, Jim.
Well, certainly crisis services. We have crisis phone lines in Duluth and around the state. NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Health, Mental Illness, has groups in town, education groups, support groups. And those are some of the resources, as well as what you've mentioned about therapists and psychiatrists. General practitioner, general practice docs do a lot of medication, and so that's a good place to start as well.
There's also a National Depression and Manic Depression Association, ndmda.org, in the National Institute of Mental Health on the web. It's a good resource too.
Mm-hmm. And some of those organizations I know also have like these associations have chat rooms too, where you can even get support for people who don't live in as populous an area to kind of find support the way we have here. Mm-hmm. Heather, we're coming up on the end of the show. What is the message that you would want to send to people, either family members out there or other people with bipolar illness who may be watching and may be struggling right now?
It's hope that you can actually make it out to the other side, that there is another side, that you're not going to feel this way for the rest of your life. It's an amazing feeling to actually start accomplishing things that you know you're capable of a long time ago. And so when it all starts clicking and it all starts working out, that is just a tremendous feeling. It just fills you up. It's just great. And people need to know that there's a way out.
I think that's a wonderful message, and there's not, what else do I have to add to that? That there is hope. And the way Heather got to that place of hope is that she hung in there, and her family hung in there with her. And it wasn't overnight, but here she is. She's on the Dean's List. What are you doing out there? You hang in there too, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links, and read my blog, the place where I will answer more of your questions, because you did call in a lot of questions today. You can also email us your questions about next week's show, when we will have our very super special guest, Duluth's very own Maria Bamford, a nationally known comedian and actor who speaks openly about her own mental health issues. Be sure to join Maria and me for what promises to be a rich, and I kind of think going to be a lively discussion here, when we're going to be talking about getting help and getting better, kind of a continuation of the discussion we just had. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night.